We have some really exciting news because we are going to be setting up a community-driven monthly challenge here on the Sketchwave. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things Procreate and digital art. And I say we because it's myself and my co-host, the one and only James Julier. James, how has your week been, mate, since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been a quite a busy one. Getting back into doing a little traditional painting. I keep saying this, but I should at some point show some of it. But I've kind of done murals in the past for other people and kind of doing it for myself a little bit around the house. I've been in the new house for 4 months nearly. So I figured I'd quite like to decorate my own house with artwork a little bit. So I've enjoyed doing that.
Straight onto the walls or onto canvases?
Yeah, no, straight onto the walls. You know.
Oh wow, cool.
Will make it difficult to sell. I'll have to paint over it. If we can sell the house, we'll have to paint it back over it. But anyway, that's the way it is, isn't it? Because it is not even just the wall. It kind of fits around the furniture because I'm not pulling out the furniture to paint the mural behind it and then cover it up. So, so it will end where the furniture, goes in front of it. But anyway, it's fine for while we live there. I'll just have to paint over it if we come to move. But so yeah, it's been a
that's
fun
sick.
one. Yeah. Have you had a busy one? Or?
I was going to say, how has that gone down though with the family? Are they all for it, or have you had to really pull some strings to make that work?
Well, it's been slightly at the neglect of household chores, but I kind of like I'm working, but I'm doing it for fun, really. But yeah, no, it's all been good. I'm very supported, so I'm thankful for that.
Good. You asked, my week's been standard procedure. Although we've had some bits and bobs been happening around the house, it's a bit disruptive in that way. So I haven't been kind of recording as normal. But yeah, other than that, pretty standard procedure. We have got a few different things to talk about in today's episode. There's going to be a look back at our recent tutorials. There's going to be a look back at some designs that we've actually made based off of our time challenge. But we have some really exciting news because we are going to be setting up a community-driven monthly challenge here on the Sketchwave. Each month, we're going to go ahead and create 2 different doodles. I'm going to create one. James is going to create one, and then we're going to send the doodle to each other and then do another recorded drawing where we go through the process of taking a look at what we've created based off of the doodle provided by the other person. Now, what we are equally then going to go ahead and do is provide the doodle to you. So you can go ahead and join in with our monthly doodle challenge. And then at the end of the month, we're going to go ahead and take a look at your submissions that you've sent us.
So if that's something you want to join in, then you just need to download the doodle that we're going to provide. And once you've completed your artwork, upload it to Instagram, tag us in it, so then we'll be able to see it, respond to it. And hopefully, if it's one of the chosen ones, we'll feature it in our upcoming episodes as well.
We hope this is going to be a really fun challenge, I think, for everybody to join in with. I think it would be cool to see everybody's interpretations. Me and James were brainstorming little bits and bobs about this challenge and how it was going to work. It will be that on the first, roughly the first video of the month when it will be our
We'll do it.
We'll do it. And then you'll be able to see that video in time for the start of the month. And then we're thinking maybe a couple of weeks later. Things are going to be on the fly. We're working out how the best we want to do this to fit the schedule, potentially guests and different episodes and so on. So you'll have to roll with the punches, I'm afraid, a little bit, but while we get this going. But we hope it will be really enjoyable for everybody to join in with, because a lot of people had so much fun, got a lot of fun out the time challenge. I think it'll be really cool to see people's versions as well, and them being able to get involved. Now, I mentioned the time challenge because we did that a couple of weeks ago. And the week after, I just sat here and was like, I can't let go of that composition. For some reason, I just couldn't let go of the sketch. So for me, I had to go back in. Now, for the viewers, last week, I actually showed James some work that I'd done based off of that. And then in the week since then, James has gone off and equally gone ahead and created a finished design based off of one of the sketches. So what happened is I had a look at the sketch that I initially created for the time challenge. It was the portrait orientation, and it was the quite steep cliffside edge. Now, when I was looking at it the second time around after we'd finished our time challenge, I looked at it and said, there's a lot of things here, especially based off of how we actually did it in the video, that I want to change. I also wanted to change it quite a lot anyway, so it wasn't just sort of very tightly strung to our time challenge. So I did a bit of refining. you'll be able to see that the sketch was initially portrait. I then transitioned it into a landscape orientation and stripped away the trees, elongated the kind of cliff edges, and equally integrated in some waterfalls. And we then, as we said last week, had a bit of a discussion. James went off and took the initial sketch, and we've both created two finished kind of designs from our sketches. Now, just as a heads up, James has drawn his simply out of love and passion for the sketch. So it's not available anywhere as of right now. If you hammer him in the comments, then just let him know. Maybe he'll make a tutorial out of it. However, mine is going to be a tutorial. And by the time you're watching this, it's actually out on the day of releasing this episode. So if you want to crack on with this tutorial that I'm showing you, that'll be available on my Patreon. James, I actually want to start with yours first of all, because I think it would be nice just to carry on with the kind of same orientation that the sketch was designed in.
Yeah.
What did you like? What did you want to change? How did you want to go about it when you had like complete spare time to do so?
I mean, I've not spent a huge amount of time on it. In all honesty, I spent about another 45 minutes on it, and it's not been done from scratch. It is the original that we produced during that episode, and I've just fine tuned it. I've not started from scratch. I've just taken that and run with it, and just done what I would have done had I been given another 30 minutes on the challenge. And so I just fine-tuned mainly the tree. The tree was very like a really vibrant brown, and it was just far too zingy, far too it just wasn't the right kind of brown. It needed subduing and making a darker color predominantly, but then it was also a chance to just refine some of the foliage and add some branches. But then also the kind of middle, well, not even the middle distance, the distance on the side of the hills, it was a bit kind of mushed and a bit kind of thrown in there. So I've added some sort of textures of like trees climbing up the hillside there a little bit. So yeah, just gone to town with some of the textures and given it a little bit more love and attention that I would have liked to have been able to do. But we were sort of 10-minute slots and then swapping it backwards and forwards, weren't we? So yeah, it's not vastly different. It's still basically the same image. It's just made it, more up to the kind of image that if it was a full tutorial, it would be more akin to that. So it was another 45 minutes that I spent on it. I was actually taking the kids swimming. And while I'm sat there, while they're having the swimming lessons, it was just something that I had half an hour or so, to actually add and tweak it there. So bad parent, I wasn't watching the swim. I was actually doodling away, but there you go.
I'm sure they had a great time.
They don't care. To be fair, they do it one at a time, and they sit on their tablet while the other one's doing their swimming lessons. So they were ignoring me equally as much. So it's all good.
I love the. It's really cool to see how you've sharpened quite a lot in comparison to the version we did, because a lot of what we did was so quick that we probably used brushes that were far too soft at the time. But there's so much refinement in there. There's lots of really cool bits that I could spot. I don't know if this was part of the original that you did, but first of all, you've got some lovely clouds in the sky at the back. I think, was that done at the time? I can't remember.
There were some clouds, but I've slightly refined them. Perhaps we could show them side by side, and then people can look at the differences of them. So the clouds were slightly refined. It's mainly that kind of distant mountain area that I feel that needed. And there were some colours that were just too vibrant a green, too rich and too saturated. And so they just needed subduing a bit of blue. Because obviously the colour perspective gets desaturated and more blue typically in a daylight environment, doesn't it? So just drenching them in a bit more blue and cooler greens for those distant.
So how did you go about doing that? Was that just like a soft airbrush over the top of them? Was that a layer effect?
It just went straight over the top with the airbrush, really, and it was literally just doodling over the top of it just to refine it. The only thing that I had to go back and change foundationally was the tree. So I did actually erase quite a bit of the foliage and change the tree branch structure just so it felt like it, a bit more naturalistic. And even then, I'm looking at it now, and if I had another half an hour or so, then I would go in and refine it further. It's definitely not the nth degree of detail and refinement, but it's just get it to a stage where if it were a tutorial, would that be the kind of finish that I would want to present as a tutorial type image? So yeah.
Yeah, I love the foreground sharpening as well. The blades of grass as well, which are really nice little touches. It just gives it a sharper effect right in front of you. There's also a really nice subtle effect, which is I think the trees making their way up the mountains in the distance. That's very subtle.
That's the bit I was happiest with. Yeah. That's the area where I spent a bit of time on.
Sometimes you can just tell because it's like the colours are just absolutely bang on. So it's just really satisfying to look at, isn't it? And especially if you've drawn it yourself, you just look at it and go, yeah, that's really, really pleasing. And do you sharpen up the top of the mountains as well with some snow? Can I see as well?
Yes.
A little bit of sharp lining on there.
Yeah. They're a bit mushy at the time. They were kind of thrown in there, weren't they? So, they were, it was kind of a vague suggestion of it. And I actually added a lot more green to that hillside. It was kind of rock textures and almost a suggestion of more snow. But I wanted to just condense that snow at the very top and actually have more greenery climbing. Because it's like that. It's not high mountains because we're already quite high in the scene, aren't we? It looks like we're on not too dissimilar a height to the mountain sides. We're just looking at it from a distance. So I figure there's loads of green where we are from our vantage point, and so there should be a lot more green climbing up the mountain or the hillside there as well. So.
Because in my one, I extended the sketch. This is why I really wanted to go back in, because I also wanted to try and create something a little bit different in terms of, obviously, we didn't actually discuss prior that, well, when I was creating this, that I was going to do it. So for me, it was just making sure that I wanted things to be slightly different. So I've stretched out the sketch completely to the right-hand side, because I also felt like even if you stretch it out that way, you don't necessarily need to fill it with anything, because if anything, it just aids the sort of concept, as you said, that we're really, really high. Like we're on this cliff edge, this really very high, frighteningly high path that I would never get on, because I would just be on all fours, just the wife would be shouting at me and it would be awful. I'd get stuck there. But I wanted to stretch it out that way and just show a lot of height. And I thought the best way I could do that as well is to introduce what was initially one waterfall, and then just I got carried away and added 3 total, and carried on the path into the distance. Tried to be a bit adventurous with a bit more colour. If I start at the foreground, I love very high contrast, and I know I do, but like the dark bushes, a little bit of trickle of the mid-tones, and then just a really nice bright highlight where the sun is catching on the edges and stuff like that. A few little tricks in here that I always like to do, just personal, just aesthetic, is like a color dodge layer at the end with like a yellowy kind of golden tone, and then I'll just go over the top of everything and dabble in a few bright little spots on the bushes, the blades of grass that are super highlighted, and so on. I've said this I actually said it in the recording, I've said it many times. If I could draw anything pretty repetitively and didn't have to consider YouTube as much, it would be something like this pretty much every time, like a zigzag path with these kind of bushes and grasses that are just very, I don't know, as if I've kind of made up this own kind of environment to a degree, and the plants just growing naturally through each other. I just enjoy drawing that kind of aesthetic. I've done it on multiple tutorials on the side of like a path in exactly the same way. And I think I can't remember if we spoke about this or I said it last week or I said it in the recording. So apologies if I'm repeating myself, but it's just a matter of like repeating the same techniques as well every time, of like creating the bushes and then the details on top with the Aurora brush, leatherwood for the path, and then just so on into the rest of the scene. And it's like, what can you change? Can you change one thing? And by I say change one thing, not drastically, but like, what could you add next time? What can you change this time? And so on every single time, that you can just learn to do things in a slightly different way. So yeah, I just carried it on way into the distance. I imagine as it zigs to the left, zags to the right, and then goes left again, it wraps around the cliff edge that we're on, probably into something quite deep. And that separates us from the sort of mid-ground area where the waterfalls are, and then all the different scenes running off to the side. Tried to be adventurous with a bit more colour. At the end, I even say in the tutorial, was like, I know I am a sucker for desaturation, so let's copy it all, paste a new layer at the top, and let's see what happens if we crank it up. So give people the option at least just to try and change it.
Looks great. I like the way the path just seems to kind of go on forever there, doesn't it? You know, having zoomed in, because it's quite misty, isn't it? You get that kind of pushing it into the distance, but now zooming in, I can see that the path just continues and continues, which is really cool. And then the foreground textures as well are really nice. The little bushes, the kind of heather or whatever kind of plants they represent. They look really nice textures and contrasting kind of bright yellow in there as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, I tried to definitely, especially on the hillside in the background, there was an overlay layer in there somewhere, and just to brighten up the tops of the mountain. I think I look at it now and I still like it. I really, to be honest, I'm quite happy with kind of the contours of that mountain at the background, the mid ground above the waterfalls, because there's certain contours in there that I never do or never have done. It's kind of like the angular, sharp grooving of it. But I think there's certain bits where I could probably put a little bit more in there. But I think sometimes I think about the time constraint so much, and I could always go back and do final adjustments to my heart's content. But it's I don't want to sit someone through just me tweaking the image right at the very end for too long. So I'd also like to say to myself, let's see if it's done, step away and come back the next day. Because sometimes you look at it and go, wow, I was so self-critical. I don't know why I thought that. Like, why did I think? And it's probably because I've drawn it once before this one anyway. This is like then the second or third time that I actually look at it for what it is and go, actually, no, I'm really happy with that. So yeah, this is a tutorial, like I said, that will be available right now on my Patreon. So if you want to go ahead and actually do that tutorial, it's linked below. But it's so cool to see how with a little bit more time, and also just a general concept of like that sketch, that where you can take it. And I think if perhaps one of our doodles in 1 week, and we're not saying this will be it, but for the challenge, if we do end up creating a doodle that is something like that, I do encourage people to, extend it or integrate it somehow or whatever it may be, and come up with your own kind of concepts. It's going to be so cool to see what other people do.
Well, you say that, and then I have a tendency to create some very odd doodles. And I've already shown you some of the kind of doodles that I might throw at you. And it's kind of, it's freaked you out in terms of what you might actually do with them, isn't it? So we'll see how
this is why we're offering two.
One really weird one.
If you want to go into the back of your mind at the most abstract place, James is your guy, but I'll try and keep it a little bit safer. We were looking at some of the doodles that James used to previously do in some of his old challenges a little while ago, and I looked at a few of them and was like, okay, right, I don't know where to start. And it's a week since then, and I still don't know what I do with it. So maybe I need to just do one and see what happens. But it will be very interesting to see what we come up with, and again, what the audience will, and see how they take our sketches and whatnot and take them into different avenues. And also the differences of what we can maybe provide each month as well, the different kind of concepts as well. One might be landscape, one might be some sort of, it could be a monster or something. Then the next month it could be something completely different, with another doodle as well. So yeah, very much looking forward to it. We're going to roll into some of our previous tutorials that we've released in the last week. As always, we're absolutely churning them out. I have got 2 heart theme designs for Valentine's, of course, a little bit ahead of time, just making sure that they're out there in the world for people to get hold of. Because I think sometimes with like a Valentine's or a Easter design, if you leave it too close to it, there's an abundance of tutorials for people to do.
It has a shelf life, doesn't it? If you leave it too late, then it doesn't have a good run, does it? So
so the first one we're going to look at is the one that was on YouTube. This is a fiery heart design, a passion of love kind of inspired. Do you remember when we had Miko on the show? He said something that has really stuck with me, which was, and I don't do it to the full degree, but it's like, can you give a name to your pieces? Like, name your pieces. He would always say to his students, make sure you can name it and sort of describe it in some sort of way. So for me, there's certain things where I look at this and go, yes, it's a heart on fire, but how, like, I remember doing the sketches for it and thinking, like, I started off with like a neon one. I was like, yeah, but how does neon relate to like Valentine's and love and everything like that? And I was like, if you do fire, you can have a fiery like passion, love. And I was like, there we go. And I felt like for some reason that if I was like just looking at Miko on my shoulder and being like, that counts, right? And he's like, I felt like to some sort of weird degree it'd be like Miko would approve, I think, if the concept.
But also, you've done a lot of neon tutorials in the past, haven't you? This is a bit of a departure, isn't it? So this is a new thing. So it's always nice to try new stuff, isn't it? Looks great. I really like the. Have you used? Is it the Flames brush you have used within Procreate? Yeah. It looks really effective.
Is that within?
Is that within the? It is within the. What's the brush folder called? Is it Luminance?
Elements, I think. I've got Pocket on my phone here, so I'm just going to have a quick look. Yes, I think it's under the category of elements in
not
there.
In the light ones, right? Okay.
No, I think let's just very quickly have a look because I've got it here. Elements and flames, yeah.
Okay,
and I think I did provide. I provided I think it was 3 in total brush set. It's just sometimes when I've used a flame brush in the past, people have said mine doesn't work like yours. And I was really scrambling to work out why. Mine was completely default. My pressure curve was completely default. I'd not done anything that would mean that we'd be doing anything differently other than the actual application of the pressure onto the page. So in this particular tutorial, right at the very beginning, I'm like, I've given you the exact same brush. If I've made any changes completely and forgotten about it, it doesn't matter. You've got exactly the same brush.
I think, having used the flames brush too, I think a lot of it is the technique, isn't it? And it's how you use it. I mean, you can make it look completely artificial and it doesn't work as a flame, but then if you use it in the correct way, then it can look really good. And you've managed to use it in a way that looks great. So, but that's not necessarily the way that it instantly. It's like if someone weren't following the tutorial and was just to have a go and they didn't have a reference image or they didn't have familiarity with that as an element, then they might go quite wrong with it. Actually, it's easy to make it look not good. But it looks great in this. I mean, did you use the add blend mode as well, or is it just it already has that luminance?
I think it. So what happened is we drew out the heart first. So in the set that I did provide a stamp of a heart just so people could follow a guide. Just so that the last thing you need to be worrying about is does your heart look like a heart? It looks wonky or whatever. So something to kind of guide you through. Drew it out, and the majority of the flames as well. We then got into a stage of fine detailing, which was I provided a crackling brush, which was. I can't remember what brush it was based off of. It might have even been originally based off of the actual flames brush, but I changed the settings and so on.
Right.
So a little dabble of that. So inside the fire, there's lots of tiny little cracks and little spits out of the fire and so on, which to me gives really it that kind of granular effect that really adds to the detail of it. And then also using that slightly above and beyond the flames, and also the flames brush again, just to add in little dabbles here and there.
Sure.
I then duplicated the layer, blurred it, but used the blend mode of pin light. And pin light, based off of the background and the fact that there's a very slight kind of top light coming from the top, it's slightly grayer towards the top of the scene.
Yeah.
It just really blew out the reds and the glowiness of it. If I showed you this with and without, it would be completely different and not worthy in the same way that the pin light, does it a lot of justice. And that just gave it a really nice glow. And the rest of it then just comes together. I think there's even like a really cool blend mode of divide. So I duplicated it and blurred it, and then divide. I clipped it to the grey in the background, and then depending on how you look at it, because if I look at it on my phone, it's got even more blues and purples to it. But the very top of the heart has got a lot of blues and purples in there.
Yeah.
Compared to the bottom. So yeah, it just added a really cool effect, like the really hot fire.
Well, it gives the impression of like smoke coming off as well, doesn't it? Of that kind of atmosphere. So
used a smoke brush as well. Used clouds brush for the smoke, and then filled in the heart silhouette that we provided inside with a bit of orange, red, and yellow, so that it kind of looks really like it's like to me it looks like an object that has been set alight, if that makes sense. Like it's one of those sort of scenes that I can only think back to one when I was in Ibiza, and it was Swedish House Mafia on the beach, and they had a sign all made out of like what looked like, I guess, flowers at the time, and then they set it alight, and like there's some sort of at least a path for the fire to follow kind of thing. And then a little bit of a reflection. I think, to be honest, I really enjoyed your reflection so much of your city that you did, the city skyline. I wanted to try it with the liquefy blend mode underneath. I wanted to just give it a go for myself. I thought, why not? I did say to the people in this tutorial, I was like, this is completely optional. And at that point, I was like, I'm just going to go for it and see what it looks like. And it looked really cool. So
it does look great.
Just adds an extra element just to see to the scene. So the other heart design that I released is on Patreon. So one on YouTube, which is the fire one. The other one is on Patreon. And this is a chromatic kind of heart tutorial. And I always look at the idea of doing these kind of chromy, very sort of super shiny, metallic, reflective surfaces. And they're very daunting, to fit and cram in all these kind of ideas of what's reflecting around the room, what highlights are there, what shadows should be there, and so on and so on. But there's a very simple way to do this, and it's a lot easier than people think. You can just create a heart, you can highlight and shade as you kind of typically would, but with a little bit of a nod to occasionally, I'll put a little bit of reflective highlight here and a little bit of reflective shadow here. And then you just duplicate it as a singular heart shape on its own, and then just go to curves. And instead of having your curves go in a diagonal line, you raise the... so you make your dot in the bottom left, you make another dot slightly inwards, you raise it up, you make another dot slightly to the right, you bring it down. So you're telling Procreate, yes, these are my kind of 10% shadows, but I'm going to raise them up, I'm going to brighten them up. And then these are my 20% shadows, and I'm going to darken them. And then up and down, up and down, up and down in a zigzag all the way to the very top right. And then it kind of creates so much chromatic kind of effect that you get all of this kind of very small, shiny, glossy kind of reflections.
Have you used the liquify?
Super easy to do.
Liquify to push things around and distort things, or
nope, not at all. That is honestly just the curves doing all of that work. So all of that is to start with, like I said, is just creating a heart, highlighting shadows, again with a slight nod to a few manual kind of highlights here and there, but the rest is just it. And I also show at the end of the tutorial that if it doesn't quite come out right, or you want to involve even more kind of effects within it, just go back and this is what to adjust and what to change, and you can get more out of the curves by just adjusting your colors. So it's a really interesting kind of technique to do, but you could probably take anything and make it look quite chromy with that curves kind of effect. And I guess they're quite heavily related to each other in a sense, in terms of a heart with a reflection underneath, but in two different styles. So
very nice.
We've spoke, haven't we, about like catalogs over the months, and what we like to do in terms of I'm constantly thinking of my catalog, all these seasons that we have, all the holidays and so on. Like, is there something I can add to the catalog, or do this year I want to take a break and move past it and just let it be? Like, and you can only do so much for Valentine's Day, to be honest. So I thought, well, what's two different versions of a heart that we can do? I don't know whether I've done a
Valentine's yet. I can't remember one. Maybe I have. I'd have to go back through them, but I don't vividly remember having done one. It's difficult, isn't it? Because they can pop, or then they can fizzle and disappear, can't they? So I mean, that's a YouTuber consideration, isn't it? Rather than anything else. But if we're looking to create videos that last, or to that reach a wider audience, then sometimes if you catch the wave of an event or circumstance, a topical thing like Valentine's Day, then that can be really advantageous, can't it? But but they're really striking images. So I'm sure that there'll be, just from a materials perspective, in terms of learning how to draw, convey fire, or like you say, to create that kind of chrome, metallic kind of shiny surface look. It's probably a good exercise. Aside from the fact it's shaped into a heart, you could apply that to other things, couldn't you, sir?
Yeah. That's what I think a lot of people should always take from our tutorials a lot of the time, is like, yes, you're following to this particular design, but the principles you can apply to anything. That heart design, the chrome one, you could easily, I could see someone maybe turning this into, like, I don't know, say it's someone's birthday and they just turn 20 or whatever. You could draw a 2 and a 0 use the same effects, and maybe hang some string from the bottom of them and make it look like helium balloons kind of thing.
Definitely.
So, I think there's lots that you just take the techniques and run with it, really. I want to get to this next tutorial of yours, and the final one that we're going to look at, because I think this is my favorite tutorial of yours that you've done this year. And I'd have to have a look at all the rest of them to see where it ranks. But I love this tutorial. Talk me through this one.
Yeah, it's nothing in it is groundbreakingly different than stuff I've done before, but I think that it's a bit of a greatest hits of kind of the things that I like to do. So we've got the kind of that warm sun glow, but then it's also contrasted because of the dark, the dark contrasting silhouette kind of features as well. There's, apart from the lily pads, I suppose they're a feature that perhaps I haven't included in the past. They work better when they're in that middle distant area. I could do the lily pads, but within the confines of the tutorial, I found that was one little sticking point that, it was okay. But the overall image I was really happy with. There's not a lot to say, really. I mean, it's heavy use of the rainforest brush, would you believe? It was very heavy use on that one. But yeah, if anyone's not done one of my tutorials before, if they were to just do this one, they'd probably get a good flavor of most of the kind of techniques and approaches that I do use. Obviously, there's ones that have different things in them as well, but a lot of my tutorials have the techniques that have been thrown into this one. It is kind of like, throwing all of my tricks and techniques all into one, in a sense. But I really like the lighting. I really like the subdued quality of it. And you were talking about favoring a kind of desaturated color palette, and I suppose this fits into that too, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit inspired from the challenge that we did, and you did a tree that was very much dark and silhouetted with a light background, and maybe that subconsciously has gone in as well. But yeah, I just wanted to do something that was very much more subdued, more blues and subtle greens rather than vibrant. Because like you saying, I like to look back at my portfolio a little bit, my tutorials, and I think, well, what have I done recently and what haven't I done recently? And I've done a lot of very saturated images, and it does have some strong colours in here. Like the blues are quite saturated, but as a colour palette generally, it isn't that varied really. There's a hints of green, a lot of dark black colours, dark blues, and then some warmer colours. But yeah, it's not been as quite. I suppose it's tilting more into the naturalistic kind of color palette rather than the kind of anime style that I've done several that are on the kind of anime vibe, and this one's more tilted toward that kind of photographic look, which was a nice thing to do after not having done as many as because if I go back into my older tutorials, they were probably 99% of them were kind of photographic in terms of it looking realistic rather than stylized. Yeah. Whereas I tend to enjoy trying stylized stuff now, but this was very much tilted towards the just looking real more than anything.
I love the. What brush did you use for the reeds and the grass?
The grass was actually the smudge tool, and it was the inking studio pen, but with a smudge.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
I actually used the rainforest brush just to put the dark color, the black, and then add some greens on top, and then with the smudge tool using the inking studio pen, flick up the greens first from the top, so they're like the distant ones that are catching the light more, and then you pull from the dark through the green, so you get layers of grass just using the smudge tool.
That makes so much sense, but it's such a simple technique, but makes so much sense, and I just haven't thought of it. It's such a good idea. Wow, okay, because it's the way in there, there's certain little elements here and there that are like slightly more light and quite, not only in terms of color, but it looks like there's a few in there that are light in terms of opacity as well, that just gives it such a realistic kind of quite soft look to it. It's not harsh at all to look at.
That's a byproduct of using the smudge, really, because it kind of it fades out the colors, and rather than looking too hard edged, because like if I was to use the brush with the inking studio pen, the pressure is more about size than it is opacity, isn't it? So you'd get a very, very hard edged brush, getting thinner perhaps, but it wouldn't be soft. It wouldn't look like it was out of focus slightly or anything like that. Whereas this it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit more gentle, and it doesn't jar as much with the other details. And also the beauty of it is that you're not introducing an alien color to the placement of where you're, if you've got something there, you just drag up the colors that are already there, so it automatically blends in with what you've already got, and it doesn't look as jarring. So it's a technique that I think I'll always use now that I've kind of discovered it. So yeah.
And the lily pads in the foreground area, did you draw each individual one out? How did you go about doing that?
They were just with the medium airbrush and just drawn kind of egg shapes really, and then cut out a little notch and add a highlight and a shadow. The ones in the middle distance were the leatherwood brush, but spaced out.
Yeah.
So I did the dark layers first, and then some lighter colours over the top, and then just a little bit of motion blur. I mean, zooming in, it probably needed a little bit more blur, but they're kind of small enough and in the distance enough that if I blurred it too much, you'd lose some of that crispy texture. So
Yeah.
I decided to not push that too far. But yeah, that's the bit that I think I'm happiest with, that middle distant kind of lily pad area. It needed some in the foreground just to actually, explain what they are.
Yeah.
But then I proceeded to try and drag some grass in front of it because I wasn't 100% happy with it. But, that's the way it goes, isn't it? But yeah, overall, I'm happy with the image. But if I had a bit more time, another 20 minutes to spend on the lily pads or so, then that is what I would do. I would try and figure out a way of making them better. The problem is that they're not uniform. And, I was looking at reference images of lily pads, and that because they have different bits that stick up in different directions, and without getting into a tutorial, we spend another 45 minutes drawing each one individually and really getting to grips with that. It was just kind of, I'll just approximate at them and it'll give the effect. Unfortunately, sometimes when you do that in the foreground, then they don't stand up to scrutiny. You can get away with that a little bit more in the distance. When they're the really foreground, then, it doesn't quite work as well. But I think for the overall scene, I think it can be forgiven, because I think that they generally meld in with the environment, so I'm not too worried.
Am I right in saying you haven't done an extended version of this yet?
Not yet. No, that's generally what I do about Wednesday or Thursday of the week, and it's only Tuesday, isn't it now? So I will do, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, other than maybe tackle those lily pads in the foreground a little bit more. Sometimes I kind of like the image, and I don't really know how to progress it and advance it any more than what it already is, without just adding unnecessary clutter. So it might just be that I have to work on those lily pads and just really try and refine those a little bit. I think it's got to do that.
Fair enough. I'm looking at them though and thinking, what would you add to it? But then that's your job. That's not my job. I'm trying to look at it and think, what would you do? But I think they look great. I think the fact that you've got some in the foreground and in the mid, it tells the whole story. Like, it tells you what you need to know. Like, they're, the ones in the distance with the leatherwood are blatantly just an abundance of them. It's also nice to break up the reflections as well with like a substance or an item or subject that's on the water top, rather than just, like with a lot of time with Procreate, it's just duplicate it, flip it, and give it a little bit of a smudge kind of thing. It just adds so much more context.
Empty otherwise,
I wonder whether or not, as I've alluded to a lot of the times, like I lean a lot into enjoying quite like the darker contrast. I wonder whether that's just a subliminal thing for me, that like that's why I'm kind of drawn to this one quite so much, because although it's got such a contrast between those highlights and shadows, the reflection, not only do you get the beautiful sky and the clouds and all the textures up there, and then you get a little bit more of that really beautiful reflection at the bottom, that you then you balance that out with the really blurred out items towards the foreground as well, the additional bits of grass as well. That I think it's a really beautiful design. I just love the fall off of the colors, and I think you've got the kind of triangle kind of effect going on there, where you've got your cool and your warm tones, but you've equally introduced something else, and in this it's the grass that just gives it that kind of quite, it's like it just covers all bases in a way and just gives you a little bit of everything, but fundamentally it's the cool and warm colors. But I think the grass looks awesome and just gives it that extra little pop of something else, because it could have been quite easy, I would imagine, to not steer towards that kind of more saturated green as you've used. I'm not saying that's super saturated, of course it's not. It's quite subtle in a sense, like you said, compared to some of your recent tutorials. But you could have easily made that grass, slightly more unsaturated and bluer, potentially, depending on how you wanted to represent the scene. But to take the dive and add in that extra color, I think it looks awesome. It complements it in a way, even though it's not necessarily, adjacent in terms of color palettes and so on. It does complement the whole design. It looks awesome.
Well, thank you.
And also just the staggering, because, I'm looking at it now, and it's also a little bit up for interpretation of it's not the second tier back on, it's like the right-hand side piece of land with the three trees, is that an island in the middle of a lake? Is it attached to a piece of land on the right, and so on? There's just so much that you can gauge. Last question about it though. The land over on the left-hand side, that little bit of grass just above the lily pads, What sort of effects did you use for that? The smudging of the sort of grass up there as well. You can kind of see the sort of individual reeds. Is it a similar kind of process?
It's just the same thing. Yeah, I think I used the rainforest brush just to map out the shape of the land, and then with a hint of green on the top, and then just flicked it up with the smudge tool. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as always, you'll be able to find all of our tutorials in the usual locations, YouTube, Patreon, all of which are linked in the description down below. There you will also find the subscribe button. Because if you're watching the show and you're not subscribed, then you're not helping us. That's a bit brutal, but if you want to help the channel and support the work that we do here, you can subscribe to the channel. If you want to take your support the step further, you can now become a member of the channel, get early access to the show, you get a loyalty badge beside your name that grows over time. And who knows, maybe we'll do some exclusive content. But for now, they are some lovely little extras that you can get hold of when you hit the join button down below. James, thank you as always, mate, for an awesome conversation, little weekly catch up and a look back through all of our content. We'll see you again next week for another episode of The Sketch Wave.